And welcome back. Today we talk about him or her, depending on what you consider a lens. This is the Fuji 18 to 120 LM-PZWR f4, which is basically the first lens of a new line of lenses from Fujifilm, which is dedicated more to hybrid photographers and video makers. This is because this lens has a lot of features that we're gonna have a look at in just a moment. And just to show the effort from Fuji on the video side of things, this lens was built in conjunction with designed in conjunction with the engineers that currently work on the broadcast lenses from Fujifilm, which is one of their huge market that they cover. So it is basically the beginning of a new era for Fuji, because finally we're starting to have what Sony has done for the last 3 or 4 years, meaning more lenses that can cover at the same time photography and videography with good results. Being 18 to 120, this covers a range of 27 to 180 millimeters equivalent, which is a lot. It covers a lot, and it's an f4 constant aperture, which is also really good. It's sold at $899, which in euros translate to approximately around 1,000 and something. It depends on the market you're looking at. And for the price, I'd say that if the lens delivers what it promises, this is a very interesting lens. Of course, it competes with the 16 to 80 millimeters f4, which was released 3 years ago from Fujifilm. Have a look at my review over here, probably. And that lens, though, as you can see from my review, is definitely more geared towards photographers rather than videographers. While this one, and you will see why, is a very true hybrid lens that, again, if done the right way, can make hybrid photographers, hybrid video photographers really, really happy. Now let's talk about the build quality. The lens is probably built of plastic. I don't know if you can hear it. It also feels a little bit hollow in the hands, which is weird because usually Fujifilm lenses are very solid. You can feel the build, but at the same time, make this lens, which weighs 460 grams and is fairly long. You can see the XH2 is not a small body, and the lens definitely is definitely long. It's not too thick, but it's definitely long. But despite weighing 460 grams, which is basically the same of the 16 to 80 millimeters, it's the fact that it's in a longer body that does not extend, because this has internal zooming and internal focusing, makes it feel lighter than it actually is. Meaning that it feels like a very lightweight lens, and this is a great thing when you're handling, when you're bringing it around, and it doesn't unbalance your camera towards the front. The lens is weather sealed, as you can see. It's of the WR lens line. Has no IS, which is something I kind of complain about, because it would have been great to have a video centric OIS on the lens, but it doesn't. You have to rely on what your camera does or on a gimbal. It's got no aperture ring. As you can see, you have your focusing ring, your zooming ring, and this rocker over here, as well as these buttons over here, which give you a lot of control. And basically this rocker over here, as you can read, is for both zoom and focusing control, because this is a power zoom lens that you can control it via this. You can control pretty much everything. I think the way Fuji designed it is that you have the normal zooming ring and the normal focusing ring for those who are photocentric and don't want to give up that kind of control. And you have this, which is again is a rocker that goes back and forth, which moves the zoom in a way that you can control the speed, zoom and the focus, and you can control the speed of what you're doing. And also these two buttons are for the same purpose. So you have plenty of controls, and this lens definitely shows that it's for a hybrid audience more than for just photography audience. But you don't have the aperture ring. They couldn't add the aperture ring. I guess they didn't want to add the aperture ring. And speaking of aperture, this lens claims to have stepless aperture control. We'll see more on that when we talk about video, because in photography it doesn't really matter, honestly. And what else? It's built with 7 aperture blades. Although we'll see when we talk about image quality that it performs really well. And I guess that's it. It claims, no, the most important thing is it claims to be parfocal. I mean, Fuji doesn't necessarily mention the word parfocal, but the lens can, while you zoom, keeps the focus. And so even if it's not 100% parfocal, the lens somehow can keep the focus while you're zooming, which is, if you know my reviews, this is one of my biggest complaints when it comes to the 16 to 80 millimeters. So overall, despite the plasticky feeling of the lens, which again, I don't know if it's plastic or very lightweight metal, the lens feels a little bit hollow, but other than that, the construction seems really good, and more than anything, seems to be very well thought out. Speaking of image quality, let me start saying that you need to consider that this lens is a long-range zoom lens. What does that mean? That means that it would be sick to expect an image quality that is comparable to that of some prime lenses like the 56 1.2 or the 33 1.4 or 18 or whatever. So we need to keep that in mind. It's a zoom lens, it's a long-range zoom lens, and it's not even one of the most expensive ones. So there will be some compromises. That being said, and now we'll dive into the image quality, you will understand that the lens is not bad at all. Starting from vignetting, I will not show that many pictures because if I do that for every focal length, we can stay here forever. So you gotta trust me on that because that's the only way we can do it. But in general, vignetting is visible when starting at 18 millimeters is visible at f4. It's almost gone at f6. It's gone at all at f8. At 23 millimeters, it improves a little bit because it's still visible at f4, although less than f8, less than 18 millimeters. And it's basically gone at f5.6. The same thing goes for 50 millimeters. At 80 millimeters, we start to see a little bit more vignetting at f4, but it goes away at f5.6, while at 120 millimeters, it is visible at f4, it's almost gone at 5.6, and it's definitely gone at f8. Overall, in any of these situations, the vignetting is never something that should bother you because in general, it is, yes, visible on a white paper, but in real life, it's not. It's a non-issue. Now let's talk about the sharpness. At 18 millimeters, the center is already really good at f4, and it improves a little bit at 5.6, but it's just marginal, and it keeps its sharpness up until f8, meaning that between f4 and f8 you can hardly tell the difference. It's really sharp, and it starts losing sharpness at f11, remaining usable at f16, and basically unusable at f22 because the diffraction has already taken away all the sharpness. Mind you, this is still on a 40 megapixel sensor. When it comes to f16 and f22, it's basically the f11, f16, f22. That's basically the same throughout the zoom range, meaning f11 is still acceptable. F16, you can accept it, but it's not the best. F22, it's basically not usable. 23 millimeters, it is really good at f4, and again, it keeps its sharpness throughout the aperture range up until f11, while the corners are basically already almost the same quality of the center at f4. They just improve until you get to f8, and then diffraction starts to kick in. The same thing goes at 50 millimeters, which I think is the sharpest, like the sweet spot of this lens. I've taken so many pictures around that focal range, and it's super sharp, and I'll show you some later. And it follows the same path that we had at 23 millimeters. And the same can be said for 80 millimeters, where corners are also a little bit better than 23 and 50. So really good performer here. At 120 millimeters, which is the longest end of the zoom range, you definitely lose some sharpness, but it's not dramatic. And especially where you lose more, it's especially in the corners. But overall, the image is still usable. And if you think that you get a very usable image throughout the zoom range, throughout the aperture range until f11, it's something that you can be pretty happy with. I've seen other reviews online where they claim that the quality is not that great. I do not agree. It may be a bad copy of the lens, but in general, I cannot complain with what I got with this lens. Although I must say that in real life results, I can have super sharp pictures, as I said, around the 50, 60 millimeters focal range, while it's a little bit harder to see the same sharpness when you zoom all the way in. Now, is this something that makes the lens unusable? Definitely not. And you've seen the lens is still very usable, and with a little bit of work with the details in post, you can definitely bring a lot more up. But in general, I needed to tell you that shooting a wall is a little bit different than shooting in the real life. Longitudinal chromatic aberration is a non-issue, and it's very well controlled. It is a little bit prone to flare, and the control for ghosting is decent. Again, we're talking about a very long zoom range, so you have to give up on something over there. And even fringing is very well controlled. I didn't see that much of fringing in general. And what surprised me is the bokeh, because the bokeh, despite having only 7 aperture blades, as I mentioned before, is really smooth, especially when you zoom in, because again, it's an f4 lens, so you didn't get that much way of playing with the depth of field, but you can definitely get a very smooth bokeh, way smoother than that of the 16 to 80, just to make it clear. It focuses decently close. You can get very close at 80 millimeters. You have to step away about 60 centimeters when you are 120 millimeters, but it's not close to what you can do with the 16 to 80, which is capable of shooting way more closer to your subject. Overall, in general, the lens, especially when it comes to photography, it is very usable, and it's very pleasing to use. And for a lens that was probably built more for video than for pictures, this is quite surprising, because you may expect that some aspect of the image quality that are more visible in pictures could have been left behind, but Fuji managed to maintain a very good image quality with this lens overall. Really, I'm pleased. You can probably tell. Speaking of autofocus, this lens is provided with linear motors, so uses the latest technology from Fujifilm, and this means that the lens is very fast and it's very silent, and is generally very accurate when it comes to focus. Although I have to mention that I have had some unreliability issues that I could not produce with the same pattern over and over again. So I think this lens may need a firmware upgrade to just make sure that those don't happen anymore. Again, I don't know, because I've been using this lens more on the X-H2 than the X-H2S. I will further test it, so this is not my latest video on this specific aspect. I may probably push out a video just on the autofocus of this lens, so stay tuned. And so my judgment is a little bit suspended on the autofocus because it's been pretty reliable overall, but those issues don't allow me to say that I trust it 100%. Again, I'm pretty sure this is gonna get fixed one way or another, but you need to know it. As I mentioned at the beginning of the review, this is the first lens that Fuji pushes out with hybrid users in mind. The first lens that they actually thought in a way that a hybrid user can use it and take advantage of all of the features. Operating the zoom while shooting is now a breeze, and the fact that it's parfocal, or even if it's not parfocal, because again, in the Fujifilm site, they don't mention the parfocal word, but the fact that it can keep focus while zooming is really nice. And the fact that you can also use the same rocker to push and pull focus is really interesting, because although it takes a little bit to get used to it, once you do, you can get pretty reliable and pretty pleasing focus transition on something that you wanna push and pull manually. Especially because I realized that when it comes to autofocusing in video, although the lens has linear motors, the focus transitions are not always consistent. That means that most of the time you go back and forth from two subjects, you've seen it right now, and the lens does good, but once every so often it goes very slow, or it's got like a hiccup here, a hiccup there. So if you want the super smooth focus transition, you definitely need to do it manually. But with this lens, you can finally do it in a really easy way. The image quality, we discussed that already, remains really good, and it's very pleasing for video. I'm showing you a couple of samples here and there that I've used. I think all of them on the X-H2, and you get a really pleasing image. I guess this is a lot goes to the camera, but again, the overall package is really good. The fact that the lens also has basically no focus breathing is an incredible help, because you can just focus and don't care about the fact that the image shrinks or widens while you operate the focus. And this is really important when you're doing videos in a more serious way. It's also got a stepless aperture closing, although it's not as smooth as I would have expected. It's definitely, so the way to test it is basically to have the camera set in shutter priority with a set ISO, not leaving the ISO in auto. So what I was doing was just set ISO and shutter speed, and then move around, forcing the camera to compensate. And you can definitely see that the transition are a lot smoother than that you can get on a photocentric lens. But they could, in my opinion, they could have been a little bit smoother. I don't know if that something that can be fixed in a firmware upgrade? Probably yes, but I don't know. And the lens has no stabilization, and as I mentioned, this is something that kind of leave a little bit of bittersweet flavor in your mouth, because it's just that thing that would have made it a little bit better. Although I have to mention that with the new cameras, the the stabilization does really good with this lens. I haven't tested it specifically too much, but for those things that I've done, the stabilization works really good. Now, the fact that you can zoom in and out and don't lose focus pushes you to use that feature finally. But I found a couple of things that needs to be mentioned. One is that while it zooms, especially when it's zooming out, it's more visible when it's zooming out. It's like the brightness of the lens changes in two specific steps, which is one around 80 millimeters and one around 23, 25 millimeters. You can definitely see a spike in the brightness of the image. So that means that despite being everything in manual, despite being an f4 fixed aperture, the lens changes its brightness as you zoom in and out. I don't know if that's fixable via firmware upgrade. I really hope it is, but my guts tell me it's not. And it's kind of a bummer, because it's that thing that damages the potential of a very great feature, which is the potential for zooming in and out very easily and in a very smooth way. And one other thing is that as you zoom in and out, as you zoom out, especially if you zoom very quickly, when you zoom out, the corners have a little bit of an adjustment. What I realized though is that is far more visible in the viewfinder, but in the final footage, you basically don't see that, or see that just slightly. So I think what you're seeing in the viewfinder is the non-corrected image, while at the end of the day, the file that you get has some lens corrections applied that makes that process a lot smoother. I think video, from a video standpoint, is a very great option, with the exception of those two flaws that I just mentioned. One of them being way more important than the other, and it's the change of brightness in the scene as you zoom in and out. One other thing, and this goes for video especially, if you're using the zooming function and you're zooming on something very far away, so let's say infinity or something like that, make sure you nail the spot that you need in focus. Because what has happened to me is that I was going with a wider area, and the lens was focusing on something that was a little bit on the foreground. And as you zoom in, between the fact that you're getting closer and you're focusing more on your subject, and the fact that depth of field becomes shallower and shallower and shallower as you zoom in, if there's an issue in the initial setup of the focusing point, that is going to show dramatically as you zoom in. So what I realized is when you're willing to use that, you better use the smallest autofocus point that you can, so that you can then zoom in and make sure that you're focused exactly on what you wanted. This is something that you usually don't do, because the lenses that you have don't allow you to zoom as you're recording, and so it's not a big deal. Or maybe you refocus after. I don't know. But since this lens allows you to do that, it's important to know that you have to be really careful about focusing in the right spot. And as I mentioned with the pictures autofocus, I had a little bit of inconsistency in the video autofocus as well, as if the camera couldn't focus on a specific subject that was pretty much really easy to focus on. Again, I think this can be fixed, but you need to know. But as I was saying, aside from those couple of things that I just mentioned, this is a good overall option when it comes to video. This lens is probably the most interesting and at the same time underrated release of the last months from Fujifilm. And this is because the world is moving toward hybrid shooting. That means is moving towards even more video than pictures. So having a lens that is hybrid and allows you to cover both with just one lens is very important. So overall, this lens is a very compelling option when it comes to hybrid shooting. And again, despite me being disappointed for those two hiccups, this doesn't have to throw you away from understanding that this lens, for what it does, is really, really good. And I would say that this lens is probably one firmware upgrade away from being a really, really good option, maybe a no-brainer option in the Fujifilm lineup for those hybrid shooter, and I know there's many around. And I would also say that this lens is a great beginning for a new series of lenses. Fuji, we need more of these lenses. We definitely need more of these lenses, especially if you can make sure that those little things get fixed before you release them, because to me that's the way to go when it comes to the future of lenses. I'm not saying that photography-centric lenses don't have to be designed and developed at all. I'm just saying that today the market is calling for more hybridness, and this is what the hybrid shooter needs. And so please, more of those. Give me a wide angle, give me maybe an f2.8 option that is using the same characteristics like the zooming ring and the zooming rocker and all of that. We need more and more of this. And so I guess that's it for today. Stay tuned if you want to see more videos on this lens, on the cameras, the comparison on the 16 to 80 millimeters, a more in-depth autofocus test. And consider this is just an initial review. I will definitely come back on this lens with a more comprehensive review, which is probably going to be shorter since I mentioned the majority of the things in this one. So subscribe, leave me a thumbs up, let me know in the comments if you need to know something more about this lens, if I missed something, if you have it, how you use it, how do you feel it, how do you feel with it, if you like it, if you don't like it, if you're interested in it, just let me know in the comments below what are your thoughts on this lens. That's it for today. I'll see you in the next one, and ciao.